Hey everybody, my name is Mike Montgomery, and today we're going to be installing large format porcelain tile in the custom shower. Our walls are prepped and waterproofed, so now let's start with step 1, our layout. These tiles are just smaller than 48 inches tall and 16 inches wide. And rather than basically doing two full pieces on top of each other, I think I want our main piece centered here on the wall.
So I started by measuring and finding the center of the wall and then marking the top and the bottom of where the tile ought to be. I put the tile in place to double check my marks, and then I grabbed my laser level to extend these top and bottom lines on all 3 walls of my shower. This is a new laser level I picked up from Amazon. It was a great deal. I'll leave it linked down below along with all the other tools, materials, and supplies. And here I'm marking the bottom of that middle tile, and it should also be the top of our first row. Next, I used my tape measure to measure the distance from the floor to that line, and it was time for step number 2, cutting.
And unfortunately, I can't use my new tile saw to cut these big pieces to length, because if I were to try and cut this, I would run into the arm of the saw, and it's just a little too big to cut in 2 passes.
I still figured I would show you though, just for the video.
Whoa! That was not supposed to happen. It snapped really clean, and now let's hope nothing. Oh man! Oh, both sides. Okay, hopefully we can salvage this, and that's also why I'm gonna demo a tile cutter.
This uses a scoring wheel instead of a blade to make the cut.
And I won't lie, I'm a little concerned with the wavy texture on the face of this tile, but let's see if it works. When I score it, I'm gonna make sure I use plenty of downward pressure so that it still scores in that dip. Then I'll line up the foot and press it down to break it. Let's go! That ended up working awesome. That is a very clean cut. Now let's test the fit. And that fits perfect with our layout lines.
And unfortunately, my tile cutter didn't have the capacity to cut the tile next to it to width.
I should have gotten a bigger tile cutter, but I think I can cut this to width on my tile saw.
I wish this offcut was just a little bit wider because then I could use it on the left side of the middle piece, but not quite.
And then each of these offcuts should start this next row.
So here you see me cutting another piece for the left side.
This piece is basically a mirror image of the other side. And I just had to shave a tiny bit off of this corner. And there we go. That's first row complete, and now you can see how our full piece centered is gonna fit.
Just like before, I measured the top and the bottom of where my tile is gonna be to make sure the wall is straight.
It's really not often you've got to do a long 48-inch cut in tile, and you could use a diamond disc on an angle grinder to cut it. But I've got something pretty exciting. I picked up this tool from Harbor Freight, which uses the same diamond blade as the angle grinder, but it has a bed on it like a circular saw that I can pair with a straight edge. That way my cut is super duper straight. I have a feeling it'll cut nicer with a little bit of water, kind of like the angle grinder, but I'm gonna try this first cut dry and see how it goes.
For only being like 35 bucks, this really came in handy and added quite a bit of versatility for these large format tiles. I sped this footage up, but this cut only took about a minute or a minute and a half.
So yeah, as you can see, it's a pretty clean cut, but not absolutely perfect. Definitely good enough for grout. And now we'll see how a little water affects cut too.
Right away, I could tell quite a bit of difference. I think keeping the blade cool really helps it travel through the material a lot faster.
I'm sure that goes against the instructions for the tool, but I definitely got a faster cut with less chip out. In fact, I'll line up the 2 cuts that I did, the dry cut on the left and the wet cut on the right. Both of these though are still really clean and usable. And this should just have a little bit of space between the far edge and the wall. Just like that. I'll cut custom pieces to fit for the top wall during installation. So let's move to step 3, installation. The thin set that we're using is a specialty mix for large format tiles. I'll be applying it with this 1/2 inch by 1/2 inch square notch trowel to make sure we get good contact and adhesion. Along with these wedge spacers, I'd also recommend a leveling system instead of just plain spacers like these which use this wedge. We'll get this mixed up and you'll see how everything works.
I started by only mixing up about 1/2 of a bag.
And we're going for kind of a thick pancake batter. Hopefully that wasn't too much. Make sure and follow the directions on your bag, but most thin set requires you to mix it, then let it set for about 5 or 10 minutes before reincorporating everything without adding any water. And you're ready to tile.
After first spreading the thin set onto the wall, I then used the notches in the trowel to create grooves in that mortar, And that's gonna let the thin set and tile squish against the wall and level out.
I'm also back buttering the tiles. This is to make sure that I've got contact with my thin set everywhere and there's no cracks.
This is where you'll use a couple of wedge spacers on the bottom of your tile to make sure everything's sitting flat with our reference lines, and you can double check with a torpedo level.
Now we're gonna add our spacers. These are 16th inch. You can also get them 1/8 inch thick. You just put the clip behind the tile.
And then once the other tiles are in place, the wedge goes across the face of both of them, making them flat with each other.
First row done. Now it's time for our full-size tile.
First, I spread my mortar onto the wall, making sure I had good coverage. Then I back buttered, and I'm pretty sure my camera overheated because it wasn't rolling whenever I put that big middle tile up. What a bummer. Either way, the next thing I did was install those tall, narrow pieces on either side that we cut with that circular saw tile saw thing. First, I used some wedge spacers against the wall to make sure it was tight with our spacer. Then I put my wedges into the spacers. I hope all that makes sense. I repeated those steps on the other side, and you can see me give the tile a wiggle when I'm putting it in place, and that helps the mortar and the wall sort of secure and really grab.
Now I can measure, cut, and install the top row. I'm gonna want this just a tiny bit shorter than 22 3/4. Nice rhyme.
I found my preference for these basic cuts is the tile cutter over the tile saw just because everything's dry, it's low dust, and it's still a really sharp cut. If I was looking for the most affordable tool combo for a project like this, I would probably get a large capacity tile cutter, basically as long as my tiles are, and that would do the majority of my cuts. And then after that, I would probably use an angle grinder with a diamond disc for any custom cutouts. I'll leave a link down below to a tile cutter with a 48-inch tile capacity that only costs like $100, and that would make the tool aspect for this project very affordable. Oh, and I should mention, with your tile, make sure the actual face is flat with each piece. That's why we're using a trowel with wider notches so it can squish a little more easily.
And that's first row complete. Awesome. Now let's move on to step number 4, cutting custom shapes into tile for things like our shower valve, shower head, and this shower niche. But first, I want to give a big thanks to Squarespace for sponsoring today's episode. If you need a website or an online store, Squarespace is your one-stop shop. And now with Blueprint AI, it's never been easier to build your own website. And DIY is really what Modern Builds is all about. Just type in a little bit about your brand and the website you want to create, and Squarespace will create a custom tailored website for your business. Squarespace online stores are super powerful, and customers have flexible payment options. From credit cards to Apple Pay and PayPal, and now in eligible countries, customers can buy now and pay later with ClearPay and Afterpay. The last feature I want to highlight are Squarespace's online courses. Squarespace has all the tools to build your course from scratch and then set your paywall, whether that's a one-time fee or a recurring subscription charge. So to learn more, make sure and follow my link down in the description. That's squarespace.com/modernbuilds. And don't forget to use my code ModernBuilds for 10% off your first site, store, or custom domain. As always, huge thanks to Squarespace for sponsoring today's video, and you all, as always, for watching. Now let's get back to step 4. I've already pre-cut and aligned the bottom row. That way we've got reference for where everything's gonna be. I also used my level to extend the lines up to our shower niche in the shower valve where our tile seams are. This is what I'll measure off of. For this first corner piece, I'm gonna measure from the bottom of the tile to the bottom of this niche, which is 31.5. And I'll subtract a 16th from that for our tile gap. And then from this same line, I'm gonna measure to the edge of our niche, which is just shy of 5.25. I don't need to worry about measuring the space next to it. As long as these reference lines are correct, and my measurements are too, this cut should work fine, so let's test it.
I did also want to highlight that you can get good, clean cuts with the angle grinder, not just that tool that I can use with the straight edge. My recommendation is to score along your cut line as a guide before you actually try cutting through your tile.
Now let's hope this piece fits.
And right away it looked like there was no gap on the left side of the niche.
Awesome! And now this next piece, which is a full-size one, will be cut in at about 7 inches and the same distance from the bottom of the tile as the last one.
I started feeling a little experimental and I wanted to cut this big piece on my sliding table, so I figured I would give it a try. This worked pretty well, although it wasn't perfect. I had a little bit of material hanging on each end, basically like tabs, that I cut away with the angle grinder. I wonder if there's another way of making that rip cut with my tile saw. And now it's time to do a quick test fit of what we can do.
That looks awesome. And it looks like our vertical cut's gonna work as well, but now we can focus on cutting around our shower valve. This line references the outside edge of my tile, so I know this extends to 3 3/4 of an inch, and then I'll also need to make marks at 16.5 and 20.
A lot of the cutouts that people need to make for valve openings are a perfect circle, but even though mine's this kind of oval shape, the same steps would apply to both situations. After laying out the lines that I wanted to cut, I grabbed my angle grinder and I started making cuts from one corner to the other so that I could break away the majority of the material in the middle. After that, I used my blade to score around the curve that I wanted to make, which is a little bit tricky, before I then removed the rest of the material with the edge of my diamond wheel. This was a little bit of a tight squeeze, but I was able to just get the angle grinder in there to remove that material.
And now we can check this piece. We've got our spacers in place, and it should just go right there. It worked! And level, awesome. And now cutting the other side of the shower valve should be really easy. This opening will be a little easier to get the blade into because it's smaller.
And one thing I'd like to reiterate is these always have a cover that's quite a bit bigger than the opening you need to make, so these cuts don't need to be the most beautiful thing. The margins I've got here are totally usable.
Now we're gonna measure for the hole we need for this shower head. I know that from the far edge, it's gonna be centered at 6 inches. And then from the top of the previous tile, the center line is 17, minus that 16th inch gap. A 1 3/8 inch hole saw is standard for making this opening for a shower head, and you don't wanna just go straight down. It's better to get the cut started at an angle and then work it flat. Otherwise it can grab, run away from you, and damage the face of the tile. I'll show you.
When you start, make sure you've got a really light touch before you get that full bit flattened out.
There we go. And that should be a perfect fit.
This is also going to have a considerably larger cover.
A perfect fit. Now I'll measure one more time for this corner of our niche. I'll cut that out and make sure that 100% this is a clean fit. We've nailed it. All of our pre-cutting is done, and that means we are ready for step number 5, taking care of our edging. To cover up the ends of the tile, I'm gonna be using this basic metal edging. You can get this in both aluminum and PVC, and I'm using 1/2 inch trim to correspond with my tile thickness. What I'm using is L-shaped, but you can get a bunch of different profiles and finishes. This piece is gonna extend all the way up, but I wanna make sure and subtract just a little bit from the height to account for the luxury vinyl plank flooring I'm using. So that'll be 95 3/4. I'll cut this with a jigsaw because this is just aluminum. Any standard woodworking tools like a chop saw will work, but for a little extra support, I've got this block of wood.
The wood just prevents this edging from rattling or shaking during the cut.
And this will just give you a lot cleaner cut.
And even with a clean metal cutting blade, you'll still need to sand this just a little bit.
Perfect.
There really are a lot of different ways of cutting this edging, and I'm curious what you do. Make sure and leave a link down in the comments to let me know.
And it looks like this one fits perfect too. Now I want to line up this trim so that I've got 2 full width planks on the end of this run of tiles. So I'll find that and then mark a line that's level so that I have it for reference.
I made a mark the same distance from the tile on the opposite wall so that this would all end up being a mirror image.
Now if you wanted, you could attach this with thin set now, but I want to make sure that I get this perfect double line, so I'll wait to install this trim tomorrow with the rest of my tile. So that's where we're gonna leave it for today. I hope you learned something in this video, or it was helpful on your next tile install. I can't wait to get these in and show you in the full bathroom renovation episode, and that'll be out very soon. So thanks again for watching. Make sure and like, comment, and subscribe, and take care until I see you next time on Mike's First Flip. It's Mike's First Flip, but not my first time doing large format tiles.